Well, hello, beautiful. Welcome back to another episode of the People Pleasers Anonymous podcast. I'm Lisa Blackham, your host and owner and founder of Lisa Blackham Coaching. And today I'm going to be talking about assumptions and how assumptions make an ass out of me and you. Something that I read somewhere about what assumptions are. And look, I have been guilty of making assumptions pretty much my whole life, and I'm curious to know what assumptions you've been making. You see, the assumptions that I was making earlier on particularly, I'm a little bit more aware of them now, but certainly the assumptions I was making really created some expectations, not only for me, but for the other people around me. And when I had those expectations of others, sometimes they worked out, sometimes they didn't. But I guess I've made assumptions along my journey about my role as a wife, as a daughter, as a teacher, even as a mum, and even as a friend. And I've also made, so they were assumptions about myself, but also I've made assumptions about other people, about my hubby and my family, my friends as well, and even, the people in my volunteer groups that I work for. I made assumptions on a lot of situations. And for the most part, they worked out quite okay, and my expectations were fine. They were met, and nobody was kind of offended or upset. But there were times when those assumptions that I made really didn't work out in anyone's favour. Not my favour, and definitely not in their favour at all. And that caused some very messy, really hurtful, and sometimes some unkind words to be exchanged, because assumptions, like I said, make an ass out of you and me. We assume we know what the other person wants. We assume we know that the other person knows what we need. And when we make an assumption that is not based on an actual verbal or agreed expectation, then the expectations that we set for ourselves can unravel us big time. And it has certainly been the unraveling of myself on a number of occasions. One of the ones that sort of stands out for me is a parenting assumption that I made right back in the very beginning when my husband and I we were married, and we decided, now, do you know what? I don't even think we decided that we were going to become parents. I think it just happened. So there was an assumption. I don't remember having a conversation about that, but we may have. But the assumptions I'm talking about here is, once the children came along, was that I had an assumption that we would co-parent, that we would raise our children together, and we would share all of the duties, all of the feeding duties, all of the bathing, the cleaning, the nappy changing, the entertaining, the education of our children, that we would share those duties 50-50. I had this assumption that once we became parents, we would do this together. That didn't happen. And how it transpired is through no fault of either of us at all. We had just assumed, and I haven't had this conversation yet with my husband, still, after 25 years. I have a feeling that he assumed that as the mum, because this is how we grew up, our parents did the same thing. The mum took on the parenting role and raised the children. The dad went to work and worked really hard to create income to support his family. And I had this assumption that we were going to do it together. So I'm assuming, here we go, I'm assuming on my husband that he felt it was my responsibility to raise the children. So he left me to it. And rightly so, like we never had a conversation about that. And because of that, he went about working, doing his thing, building a business, earning the income to be able to support us so that I didn't have to work full time. I still did work though, because I felt I needed to be in the workforce, bringing in my own money having a little bit of money to be able to do the things that I wanted to do. I assumed that I needed to provide that kind of money for myself. And therefore, I took over the role of raising the kids. I did everything for them. I became their taxi service as they went off and did their sports. I took them to and from school. I made their lunches. I wiped their asses. I taught them how to walk. I coached them on how to be respectful, kind, good little humans. I took on most of that responsibility because my husband was working full-time, busy man, coming home late at the end of the day, tired. I didn't want to burden him with all of the things that you need to do as a parent. I let him have his time. He would go off fishing and on big fishing trips and not come home for days because he needed that space. However, as I said, neither of us have had that conversation about what each of us expected of the other in terms of our role of parenting. And because we never had that conversation, it would actually cause us quite a bit of disagreement and annoyance and frustration with each other. Because when he would come home late, if he, caught up with the mates after work and didn't get home in time to help with the bath and the dinner, I would be seriously pissed off. But I didn't tell him why I was pissed off, did I? No, because that would require an actual conversation. No, it would show up as frustration and I would be resentful and snarky comments and be mean and bitchy towards him. And so he would get in a huff himself and sit in front of the TV and ignore me, basically. So we had been making these kind of assumptions throughout our whole parenting life, which is a bit sad that we've only just got to this point now. But anyhow, we're working on that. The other thing that showed up for me was in my volunteer roles, in making assumptions. I helped out a lot. I did lots of volunteering in our Netball Association and in different community groups where I would put my hand up for a lot of different things because I had this assumption that if I wanted my children and myself to be able to have sporting and opportunities in the community, I would need to give back. So I would put my hand up to do, admin roles on the committee, umpiring duties, washing jumpers, cutting up oranges, whatever it might be. I had that assumption. But along with that assumption came another assumption that if I was giving to my volunteering community, they would give back to me in a way that they would honour the commitment that I was making to them, that they would acknowledge the effort that I was making, that they would thank me and appreciate me for the work that I was doing. Now, for a very long time, that didn't happen. I was giving, constantly giving, and given that this is the People Pleasers Anonymous podcast, that's one of those traits, is this constant giving and having this assumption and expectation that others will give back to you because you give. That assumption bit me on the bum, big time. It created resentment for me because people weren't acknowledging the effort that I was making for a very long time. Eventually, I was given life membership to the Netball Association, and I am very thankful and very grateful for that. But that didn't happen until about 5 minutes before I retired from the netball. And I held that grudge for a very long time. I held that resentment for a very long time because I expected people to thank me and acknowledge the work that I had been doing regularly, consistently over those 20 years. But it didn't happen until the last minute. That's not the problem. The problem is I held these assumptions and I held myself to some expectations, and I also held other people to high expectations. And when they weren't met, the unhelpful thinking, the really resentful feeling, and the unkind, critical mind that started to, fill me with self-doubt and self-criticism really was not helpful. And it probably upset a few relationships that I had with other people at the time because I held that resentment. I probably didn't handle situations very well because I was frustrated and angry and annoyed, and that would have ruffled a few feathers, I am sure. So you can see how making assumptions without clearly communicating what your expectations are can be your undoing, and it certainly was for me. And so what I have learnt is that making assumptions really does put egg on your face. And to avoid making assumptions, it's really a helpful thing to do, I think, to ask and to clarify. So to ask questions if you don't understand something or you don't know what's expected of you, to ask more questions to clarify what is expected of you, but also give explanations, like give clear and set clear expectations of what you expect from others, how you want them to treat you, how you want them to be involved in whatever it is that you're doing. Like, for example, with my husband and I, if we had had conversations about what each of us expected of the other in our parenting role, we could have avoided so many arguments and so many, cold shoulders and unkind words, and even, going off on a holiday just because you needed to get away from each other for a little bit. We could have avoided so many of those situations by just having a conversation about what we each expected of each other. And I think we get caught up in this mind-reading game where we think other people should know exactly what we want and what we need. And it's just not true. How can it be true? How can they know exactly what we need and exactly what we want if we don't tell them? I'm baffled by myself. I've done this my entire adult life, wishing that people would do what I wanted them to do, wishing that they would remember me and acknowledge me and appreciate me, without ever asking them to help or to tell them how I felt or even what they could do to assist me. So I'm curious, as always, as I get curious, I'm curious about what assumptions you're currently making and if they are serving you. Are they setting those expectations up in a realistic way for you? Or is there an opportunity for you to get clearer on what those expectations are? And by getting clearer on what the expectations are, can you articulate them to whomever it is that you need to give that information to? How can you better let the people around you know exactly what you need in a way that serves both you and them, so that you all win and that you all get to be able to support each other in a really nurturing and compassionate way, instead of feeling resentful and feeling unappreciated and like you're not worthy of having the support that you need. I would love for you to share your thoughts on the podcast today on the topic of our discussion of how assumptions make an ass out of you and me. And if there's anything that's resonated, do let me know. Come over to my socials, Lisa Blackham Coaching, LesaBlackkham Coaching at Instagram and Facebook. You'll find me over there. And if you're worried about the fact that you're making assumptions or that you're actually feeling really resentful, frustrated and annoyed with the people around you, but you just don't know how to break that habit, it is a people-pleasing habit. It's one of our beautiful qualities that we have. I'm going to be running a masterclass, a free masterclass on May the 3rd that I would love you to come along to. I'm going to share with you some of the typical traits of people pleasers and the impact that it's having on you and what you can do to really manage your people pleasing and get to a place where you can start to be more assertive and be more confident in asking for what you need, as well as being able to articulate what you want in a way that gets you what you need, or at least to a place where you feel comfortable with the response that you get, so that you don't feel resentful all the time and like you are being used like a doormat. I would love you to come and join me. I'm going to leave the link to the masterclass in the show notes so you can sign up and come and play. There will be question time. There will be opportunity for a bit of coaching, as well as me giving you lots of information on the whole people pleasing, what you can do to unshackle yourself and unleash the true potential that you have, that all of these habits of making assumptions are holding you back from. Let's unleash that potential so you can really shine and thrive in this world and be who you're meant to be. All right, incredible human, thanks for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our episode, and I can't wait to connect with you again in the next episode. Please go ahead and rate this podcast. Let me know what else you would like to hear. By rating the podcast, it keeps it up in the algorithm so more people get to hear it, for those who really need to. So thanks for joining me, and I can't wait to share some more insight with you in coming episodes. Bye for now.